Okay, so tonight we're going to be learning the Tsadi in Sefer Reish Millin from Rav Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Kook. Now, the Tsadi, for a number of reasons, is going to need a few hakdamos like all the other letters. Two of the hakdamos, or really one of the longer hakdamos, is going to be with regards to the letter in the Sefer of Rav Kook itself. And the second hakdama is going to be about the Tsadi B'Klaliuso, in its general status, which we haven't really done with other osios, but when it comes to the Tsadi, it demands a certain level of attention, and Rav Kook makes reference to this, albeit unexplicitly, but he offers his own opinion in a machlokas, in an argument, in a fundamental argument that touches the bedrock of existence with regards to the Tsadi. And Rav Kook, B'Darcha Kodesh, and Reish Millin was not trying to be posek exactly what to do, but he is merames, and he hints towards this argument about the Tsadi. Now, when it comes to the Tsadi, which is representative of the notion tzadik, which is representative of the concept of connectivity and attachment and the dveikus between things, between one thing and its other, we have to understand that any discussion about connectivity taking place by way of anything other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kaviyachol demands a zehirus. It demands a very delicate and soft step to ensure that while talking about any spiritual potency that is not Atzmus Yisparach, we have to be very careful to ensure that our language and what we're conveying is within the realm of Raza D'Mehem Nusa, the secret of faith, and not Tachas V'Shalom. Alfei Pa'amim, not Tachas V'Shalom, B'Yotze Men Hageder De Kedusha, to go beyond the lines of holiness in terms of describing something Chas V'Shalom that could be considered something other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, with regards to the Tsadi, in Safra D'Tzniusa and in the parish of the Gra on Safra D'Tzniusa, there's a discussion about the Tsuras HaTmuna, the form of the image of the Tsadi. Now, the Tsadi, according to most commentators, is going to be comprised of two letters. It's going to be comprised of a Nun and a Yud. The Nun is going to be bent a little bit, and the Yud is going to be on top, on the back of the Nun, to form the image of the Tsadi. Now, there's a machlokes in the Safra D'Tzniusa and the Zohar Kadosh as to which direction the Yud should be facing. Should the Yud be facing towards the Nun that's bent over, so that the Nun and the Yud are facing in the same direction? Or is the Yud turning its face away from the Nun, so that the Nun that comprises the main body of the Tzadi is facing towards the left, and that the Yud, which comprises the top secondary part of the Tzadi, would be facing towards the right? Now, in Safra D'Tzniusa, according to the Vilna Gaon, he seems to state that the Tsadi, the Tsadi, takes on two different forms in two different aspects of itself. When the Tsadi is representative of the worlds of Tohu, of the worlds of constriction and destruction and chaos, when the world is not the way it's supposed to be, so then the Yud turns its face away from the Nun, and they operate under the guise of something called achor ba'achor, back to back, that the Nun is facing one way and the Yud is facing the other way, so that we understand that at that stage of creation, things were not the right way. Things were not operating according to the right way things were supposed to go in Metzius. That was representative of Olam HaTohu, of the Almin, the Cheruvim, the destroyed worlds that represent the seven Kalim, the seven vessels that break in Shiras HaKalim, which we discussed in Os Zayin and Os Ches. And in a time of tikkun, and in a time of rectification, when things are restored to be the rightful way that they're supposed to be according to the original machshava of HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kaviyachol, then the Yud turns its face towards the Nun, so that the Nun and the Yud of the Tzadi are both facing towards the left in a relationship of panim lepanim, face to face, which is representative of a unity and a measured relationship between Kedusha and everything else. Now, with regards to the ksiva of the Tsadi, this is where we come into this machlokas. According to most meforshim, the Tsadi is supposed to be written with the Yud facing the Nun, representative of the stage of panim lepanim. But according to the Vilna Gaon and his students, There's a mashma'ut, and there's an entire sefer of 1,000 pages written on this, and the Chazon Ish got involved in this as well. And this has been a large machlokes because it touched Yisodei HaEmuna, as we'll see in a moment. There are certain mekubalim and certain individuals who felt that the yud of the tzadi should be written facing achor ba'achor, the other way. Now, Kas Hashabtai Tzvi Yimach Shemam, the Sabbateans who came and interpreted the Kabbalah Sa'arizal in a way that was against the Rasa D'Mehem Nusa, against the secret of faith, they were famous for focusing very strongly on the Os Tsadi because it was representative of the name of their leader. And in their writings, the Yud is supposed to face Achor Ba'achor, representative of the Olam HaTohu. So when the Chazon Ish and the Vilna Gaon and the different halachists get involved in this, there's a large argument as to which way the Yud should be written. And Rav Kook, as we're going to see, is going to be miyashev on a certain level, that either way you look at it, it doesn't matter which way the Yud is facing necessarily. What matters is that everything is mit'aleh, everything is continuing to elevate itself towards the levels of Kedusha. That in spite of the fact that things might represent chaotic and destructive tendencies, nevertheless, for Rav Kook in his discussion of the Tsadi is going to hint, and I'm going to point out when we see it, that either way we talk about it, the Yud, or the Zayin, according to Rav Kook, which comprises the second part of the Tsadi, that for Rav Kook, the Tsadi is comprised of a Nun and a Zayin, and we're going to discuss that in a moment, that either way you look at it, there is a relationship of Ahava, there is a relationship of Kedusha and not Rishus, of positivity and not negativity between the two parts of the Tsadi, ensuring that whichever way we look at him, whichever way we paskin in terms of the machlokas, everything is tamin mit'aleh. Now that's one remez, that's one hakdama about the Os Tsadi. And part of the reason that the Os Tsadi is such a delicate letter is because it represents the concept of tzaddik. And we're going to see this by Rav Kook, that tzadi very often mistakenly is expressed as tzaddik, spelled out tzadi dalid yud kof. Now the reason for that is because of the closeness and the proximity between the tzadi and the kuf and the aleph beis. And when we train ourselves to say the aleph beis, very often we say tzadi kuf. And in saying tzadi kuf very quickly, we find ourselves saying tzaddik. To the extent that there are certain kubalim, certain bali chasidus who, when writing out the word tzadi, would spell it with a kuf. And in Chazal and Maseches Shabbos, where they discuss the osios, there's a direct correlation between the os tzadi and the word tzaddik. So we see that there is a connectivity between the tzadi and the tzaddik. And anytime we start discussing the concept of the tzaddik, the concept of connectivity, the concept of the bridge that connects Shamayim va'aretz, and that which latches one thing onto its other, we enter into a relatively delicate territory, A, because the idea has been misinterpreted by so many, and B, because the idea rests on a particularly delicate paradox which needs to operate simultaneously, which is that on the one hand, it appears that something is separate and apart from godliness, and on the other hand, everything is nullified and part and parcel of godliness at all times. And therefore, when it comes to understanding the tzaddik and the nature of the tzaddik, and this is one of the inyanim that the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh came to the world to disclose to us, and part of the reason that the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh suffered such fights against his approach is because the tzaddik is such a delicate idea that whenever we discuss it, we have to be very careful to ensure that we're still within the level of Rasa D'Mehem Nusa. Now, the second hakdama to the Os Tsadi, in order to understand the context of where the Os Tsadi is coming from in the system of Rav Kook as described in the Sefer Reish Millin, where we left off last week with the Os Pei was that language stood at the precipice. Language stood at the threshold of expression. When the particularities of being, as they emerge from within the Klaliyut HaKol of men, into the individualized particularization of the fish in the Os Nun, and Nune Hayam is the Aramaic or translation of Dage Hayam, which again brings us back to the Aleph, reminding us that translation is always a secondary level of understanding. So that as the particulars emerge out of the Klaliyut of the Mayim of the Os Mem, we are already in a state of secondary translation by the Os Nun, where particulars emerge. Now these particulars begin to engage with that which is outside of them through the os ayin, through their vision, through the klita, through the collection and the bringing into themselves of things that are outside of themselves through the vision, through the sense of vision. And then we come to the os pei, which is the emergence of dibur as it exists in the supernal realm of the interiority, where things are not yet spoken. As we said, it's the sounds of silence. Now, as each prat, as each particular stands at the ready to be emerged, because we're already coming towards the end of the Aleph phase, towards the Os Taf, where actual emergence of particularization and individual identities is going to take place, each letter that we discussed now from the Tsadi and on is going to be a further shlav, a next level, if you will, of the disclosure of particulars. And whenever we deal with particulars, whenever we deal with separateness, and the individual sense that each thing has of itself in a world devoid of the unity that is clear from the letters Aleph to Mem, we need to remind ourselves, and Rav Kook takes great length to show us this, that as the particulars emerge from within the Klaliyut HaKol, from within the generality of Kedusha, the Chiddush here is that even as particularity emerges, every prat, every particular maintains the mark and the stamp and the chotem and the essence of the unity of the klal. So that even though we enter into a world of pratiyut and separation and fragmentation with millions and millions and innumerable amounts of particular identities in the world, the system of the Arizal, as refracted through the writings of Rav Kook, is coming to show us how, in spite of the fact that particularization and fragmentation open up into numerous and innumerable parts of separateness, each and every part contains within it the essence of the Yichud HaKlal, so that even when we fall into particularization and the individual identity, which is typically identified as separateness and klipa, we can still penetrate it deep enough to find the yichud of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in there, which is basically saying what the Mekubalim have been saying all along, that there is a yichud between Kudsha Barichu and Shchinte, that there is a yichud between Sovev Kol Almin, the transcendent aspect of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Memale Kol Almin, the immanent aspect of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That Klal and Prat, yichud and pirud, ish ve'isha, zer anpin ve'nukva, shamayim ve'aretz, yichud and pirud, all of these apparent binary oppositions which need to manifest on their own, nevertheless, when we penetrate deeply enough, we begin to understand that both of them are simply the manifestation and the representation of the same yichud of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in different ways, for the sake of deepening the Giloy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence in this world, by showing that Hashem cannot only represent himself in Yichud and infinitude, but rather he can disclose himself and show himself within period as well. So that even when we find ourselves in a world devoid of Yichud, we find ourselves capable of disclosing the Raza de Mehemnus, of the secret of faith, which teaches us that the Klal and the Prat are Shav Tamid. That when you penetrate deeply enough into the interiority of existence, what we come to find is that generality and yichud and pratiyut and separation are two ways of expressing the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world, in order to reveal a greater level of emunah and kedusha. That not only can Hashem show himself in klaliyut and clarity, but even in the distortion of our lives and the difficulties of our lives, Hashem is there as well. So after the pei takes its space and speech stands at the ready, at the threshold of the individual expression of each identity in the world, the tzadi comes along, the tzaddik comes along to say that in spite of the fact that you're going to see multiplicity and an expression of innumerable differences, nevertheless, everything can be united and is united within a klaliyut, within a klal that exceeds the amount of pratim that make up that klal. That in spite of all of the difference that we find, in spite of all of the separation and klipa and sitra achra that we find, there's always already a level of kedusha that surrounds it, encompasses it, and ensures that they all serve the same purpose, namely the disclosure of the yichud on a deeper level. And so for Rav Kook, the Os Tsadi, or the Klaliyut HaKol, which is identified as the Midah of Yesod, Ki Chol B'Shamayim U'Va'aretz, that everything between Shamayim and Aretz is unified together. That everything, in spite and specifically because of the apparent difference between them, create a generalized whole that discloses HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a deeper way. So the Tsadi comes to say that do not fear the emergence of particularity. Because again, from the men to the tough, we said we're already at the level of Misa. We're already at the level of the disclosure of the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu into particularity and into distortion and into separation. The Tsadi comes to say, do not fear the separation. Do not think that the innumerable aspects of personalized and individualized identities and existence within the world speaks about difference and separation as if there were no unity, chas v'shalom, but rather see within the particularity, see within the emergence of multiplicity and the myriad distortions and separations that we experience in our daily lives and in the collective of the entire universe. Do not see difference there. Al tomru mayim mayim. Don't say that there's duality, but rather see the yichud ha'amiti, and that is the avoda of the tzaddik. The avoda of the tzaddik, as we're going to see, or at least I should rather say one bechina of the aspect of a tzaddik, is the capacity to show that everything that appears to be distorted and insignificant and inessential is actually part and parcel of the essentiality of creation. That even though there are so many areas in the world and in our lives and in the lives of other people as we see them, that point towards and yell towards the fact that there's separateness and distortion and distinction, the Or HaTzadikim, the light of the Tsadi, the light of the Tzaddik comes and shows us that all difference, all disparity, all multiplicity, all pirud, all hester, all he'elem, all concealment is nothing but a further manifestation of the Yichud HaKlal, of everything being part of the same movement, of the same Gilui of Kedusha, of the same Tosefes Kishut, of the same adornment of perfection, which allows us to deepen the level of perfection that existed prior to existence. And Rav Kook is going to show us that the avoda of the Tsadi is to come and show how every prat, every particular that emerges in the Pei, that emerges through the potential towards speech when the individual identity begins to take on a sense of itself, the avodah of the tzaddik is to come to nullify self-interest. The avodah of the tzaddik is to come to say that you, particularity, the individual who identifies themselves as the center, is connected in a fundamental and ontological way with the tzad, with that which seems secondary. Tzad, again, stadiyut, sidedness or secondariness, or things that are insignificant. Rav Kook sees that in the Tzadi. And the Tzadi comes to show that the ikr and the tafel, the middle and the center, the essence and the inessential, are actually both part and parcel of the same disclosure of unity, to the point that there is no difference between center and peripheral, to the point that there is no difference between the center and the side, between essential and inessential, because each bespeaks the disclosure of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And one source that brings this out most clearly is the Mittler Rebbe, the second Rebbe of Lubavitch, in his writings Toras Chaim. Now, the second Rebbe of Lubavitch, the Mittler Rebbe, is unique in the sense that, along with a few other tzaddikim, perhaps Rabbi Nachman, Tzadike Ishbitz and Radzin, certain students of the Vilna Gaon, the Mittler Rebbe was capable of descending into particularity, into distortion, into he'elem, into concealment, for the sake of showing that even that which appears to be separate and apart from HaKadosh Baruch Hu is nevertheless a further revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Nobody like the Mittler Rebbe descends into the pratiyut and into the actual existential crises that a person sees in their daily lives. When a person reads Toras Chaim or any of the other writings of the Mittler Rebbe, Zchus Yagen Aleinu, a person immediately finds that here is a tzaddik who is capable and willing of going into the actual everyday experience of the individuals who are non-tzaddikim and empathizing and sympathizing in a way that is nearly unfounded in the history of tzaddikim. That the Mittler Rebbe showed us, no matter how deep you fall into the pratiyut of life, into the distortion and separation of life, Pratiyut is always for the sake of elevating itself, always for the sake of showing a level of yichud. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe Schlusia Ganalenu also told us that this was part of the avoda of the Mittler Rebbe. Now the Mittler Rebbe in his Sefer Toras Chaim in Parshas Vayechi, in the last Maimer, which is titled Divrei Maskil Ben Porat Yosef, he discusses a fundamental question. The question is, how does a Jew, how does an individual who believes in Kedusha, who has emunah that existence has purpose, how does that individual come to terms with the fact that there are extremities in life, that there are things that appear insignificant, that there are things that appear to be opposite the center of life, the main aspect of life, the ikr, that when you look from the perspective of the ikr, there are mutarot, there are extremities and waste and wasteful things that are created in the world, and things that seem to have absolutely no meaning, whether it's in our own minds with meaningless thoughts or imaginations or machshavos ra'ot, or when a person physically speaking in terms of the mutarot that their body produces, or in terms of looking at the world and the mistakes and the shigayot that people make, things that don't actually lead to anything. How could it be that on the one hand, we believe deeply that everything has a particular purpose, yet on the other hand, there are multiple things that appear to be entirely meaningless and purposeless and tafel and inessential? And the Mittler Rebbe describes that the avoda of Yosef, the avoda of the tzaddik, the Tsadi, as we're going to see, is to show that even that which appears to be mutarot de muturot, the extra of the extra, the inessential of the inessential, meaning to say the least significant things in life, the things that appear entirely devoid of purpose and essence, even those things, through the avoda of the tzaddik, through the avoda of the os tzadi, even those things can be elevated and connected to the klal. Everything in existence finds its place through the avoda of the os tzadi and through the avoda of the tzaddik, through the midah of yesod, which is makasher shmaya va'ara, the hakol biyachad, everything together, even that which appears outside of the kol, even that which appears to be insignificant, only through the avoda of Yosef HaTzadik, who is poter chalomos. Now the Mittler Rebbe says that the word poter, which means interpretation of dreams, can spell out two other words. It can mean tofer, which means weaving and sewing. It can also mean porat, or ben porat Yosef. That these letters represent, on a certain level, the ability of the tzaddik or the os tzadi to sew together all disparate entities that represent the multiplicity of the world in order to show that the center and the side, the essence and the inessential, that which appears to be fundamental in existence and that which appears to be non-fundamental and extra, both of them create a greater klal at the end of the day. And one more makor that we see this in is Rav Tzadok in Sidkas HaTzadik, which is based on the Os Tzadi in Siman Kuf Yud Ches, where he discusses the Gemara in Masechah Sukkah, where he says that where do we know that Sichas Chulin, the inessential discussions of the Tzadikim or the Talmidei Chachamim, need limud? From where do we learn the simple fact that the inessential talk of Tzadikim and Talmidei Chachamim needs limud? We learn that out from the pasuk Va'aleu lo yival, that by Talmidei Chachamim, there's a certain giloy, there is a disclosure by the tzaddik that even that which is inessential, even that which appears to be separate and devoid of essence and unity, is part and parcel of the disclosure of the klal. So the os tzadi for Rav Kook comes to say that as we emerge into pratiyut, as existence begins to take shape, as we move further in the process of the mem to the taf, which represents the misa, which represents the disclosure of existence and separateness from the unity of godliness, we still show, and even more importantly, we see here, the or kitov, the good light of the tzaddik that allows us to remember and connects us to the simple truth that even though existence seems so separate and disparate as expressed in the ospei of Dibor, we can still find unity. And with that, we're going to see the words of Rav Kook. Rav Kook says as follows: Nirdefu hatzadi b'mivta'o hanismach al hakuf sheba acharav lihiyot mevuta b'shem tzadik. The os tzadi chases after the os kuf in the expression through speech of the os tzadi to the point that it sounds like the os tzadik. Now Rav Kook here is basically spiritualizing or elevating a mistake of Anshe Knesset Yisrael, of Knesset Yisrael. Knesset Yisrael have made the mistake of pronouncing the Os Tsadi as Tzadik because the Kuf follows the Tsadi in the Aleph Beis. And what Rav Kook is saying is that when we discuss the Os Tsadi, we have to discuss it in connection to the Os Kuf because the Tsadi is the aspect of Tzadik. Now, in no other letter does Rav Kook make a big deal about the proximity of another letter to it except by the Os Tsadi. And I'd like to claim that because the Tsadi, the Nekuda of the Tzadik, is all about connecting that which is disparate and connecting all that appears separate from each other, specifically by the Os Tsadi, when Rav Kook teaches it, it is connected to the letter that is next to it. Because the entire concept of the tzaddik is the ability to connect one thing with its other, even though it doesn't appear to maintain an essential connection with that thing. Because the tzadi is makasher shmaya va'ara, it comes to connect disparate entities, and therefore when discussing the Os Tzadi, Rav Kook can't discuss it without the tzadi connecting itself to that which is other than it, to that which is tzadi to it, to that which seems inessential to it, to show that everything is connected through the Os Tzadi. Musag HaTzedek, the concept of righteousness, b'klaliyuso u'pratiyuso, in its general sense and its particular sense, harehu mishtachlal b'kibutz hatzvaim kulam ba'arichat kol hakochos kulam al mechonam ve'al sedram b'mekomam v'shiuram that the concept of tzedek, of righteousness, which again brings to mind the letter Tsadi as well as the concept of tzidkus or the tzadik, represents the combination or the mishtachlut, the collection together to form a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. The entire concept of righteousness, whether we're talking about the general concept in its ideal state or the particular sense as it manifests in daily existence, tzidkus, or righteousness, represents that everything finds its right place. That even though there are so many multiplicities within existence, and one thing appears to take the space of the other, and one thing appears to take the space and the avoda of what another person should be doing, to the point that kina emerges, and jealousy emerges, and fighting emerges, and machlokas emerges, tzidkus, or righteousness, is when everything finds itself in its rightful place. Tzidkus, or tzedek, represents the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu operates in the world in an ideal way, as things are supposed to be, where each and individual person can see their lives, see their experiences, and say that things are the way they are supposed to be. Now, more often than not, we find ourselves in a world that is devoid of apparent tzidkus, where a person feels the need to explain to themselves why it is that they don't have what they should have, or why it is that things are unfair, or why it is that things are not the right way. And then we come to the concept of tziduk hadin, saying that din and judgment is right. Even that which appears to be outside the way things are supposed to be, the Jewish soul is capable of saying tzidkas tzedek, at the loftiest point of the week, at Rava de Ravin, at Shalosh Shudas, when everything is disclosed in its clarity. The Tsadi represents tzidkus, it represents righteousness, which means that everything is arranged the way it's supposed to be. After the Os Pei, when we find the multiplicity and distortions that abound, the Os Tsadi comes to remind us that tzidkas tzedek le'olam, that all differentiation, all separateness is simply to disclose the unity that comes afterwards. Hatstadiyut. Technically, this word can be translated as sidedness, or secondariness, or that which is inessential, or that which appears to be mutar, or not connected to the center, which represents the essence of an idea, or the main point of an idea. The center is typically identified as that which holds everything together, and the tzad, the tzadiyut of everything, represents that which is outside the circumference, that which is outside of the ikr, that which is tafel. Now, parenthetically, we can begin to understand the avodah of Rabbi Nachman Tzchusei Ganalenu in the beginning of Sipur Maisios, when he tells us by the first Sipur of finding the lost princess of the Avedas Bas HaMelech, that the Mishnah Lamelech, the soul that comes down into the world to redeem that which appears to be lost, that which appears to be secondary, he is only capable of doing that through a shvil min hatzad, through a pathway towards the side. Tzad again is going to be associated with the Tsadi, with the Avodah of the Tzaddik, which is coming to show that even that which appears to be outside the way of traveling and traversing the world in all of its distortion is nevertheless fundamental, and it becomes part of the Iker. Rav Kook continues, and he says at Tzadiyut, Harashum shel hayichas shel kol nose b'chol erchav el masha chutzlo. Stadiyut and secondariness and inessentiality represents the relationship that each individual identity in particular has with that which is outside of itself. What relationship do I have with that which appears to be inessential to me? The things that appear to be meaningless in my life, the things that appear to be random. Again, as we discuss the transition from the Pei to the Tsadi, we're already beginning to discuss the emergence of particularity into a more expressed form. And therefore, the questions of separateness and duality and insignificance begin to make more sense personally speaking, which is why when it comes to the Tsadi, at least in the way I'm interpreting Rav Kook and Reish Millin, it needs to be more psychologized. It needs to be interpreted on a psychological level as opposed to perhaps the ontological level, which we've been discussing until now. Not to say, God forbid, that this doesn't exist on the ontological level. The Os Tzadi, again, represents the emergence from the Os Pei of particularity while ensuring that everything is unified in a klal that is greater than the sum of its parts, in a whole that is greater than the sum of its pratiyut. Nevertheless, in order to understand the avoda of the Os Tzadi and the avoda of the Tzaddik, or an aspect of that avoda, it serves us well, and Rav Kook shows this in other areas in his writings about Tzedek and the Os Tzadi, or the Tzadi HaSofit, as we see in the Osios of Mansapach. It's important that we interpret this in a personal and individualized way as well to understand what Rav Kook is trying to say. When everything is arranged in its proper sense, then we find that there is separateness and distortion and empty spaces in the universe. The Tzadi comes to show us that the relationship between two separate things needs to be malei tzedek, needs to be filled with righteousness, needs to be filled with the sense that everything is kadosh and everything is whole. Rav Kook continues, "Hachefetz hapnimi shehatzadim kulam shel kol musag shel kol matzei v'hove shehem hem hanogaim b'ha'olam hachitzoni hem yehiyu yichushim meleim tzedek v'tzidkas Hashem tegala b'chol olamim." That the impulse towards righteousness, the impulse that is disclosed in the Os Tzadi, is to ensure that the secondary relationship between each thing and its other, between who I am as an individual and all of that which appears to be insignificant and separate from me, the Os Tzadi and the Avodah of the Tzaddik comes to ensure that those relationships are filled with righteousness, to show that even though there appears to be no more room because of the other, I need to accept the other. I need to emerge into a relationship that is malei tzidkus, of acceptance, of recognizing that each thing has its rightful place, that nobody else can touch my arena. Nobody else can come into my Dalet Amos and take away that which is predestined for me. And therefore, I no longer need to be jealous and afraid of the other. I need to accept the other and recognize that through myself, my personal identity, my pratiyut, and the other's pratiyut, there emerges not a machlokes or a distinction, but rather a further disclosure of the yichud of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now Rav Kook continues, and he says, "B'chol tnuoseihem v'hofa'aseihem," that as particularity emerges into the world, as difference abounds, as one thing says to the other thing that there is no more room for me, that you are taking up my space, and particularity begins to cloud the light of the cloud, the light of Yichud, the Os Tzadi and the Avodah of the Tzaddik comes to say that no, each thing in its own particular shape, in its own particular movement, and its own particular emergence, maintains its identity in spite of the fact that there is otherness. Because the job of each particular, as disclosed in the Os Tzadi, is to see how the center and the side are unified. And Rav Kook says something remarkable elsewhere in discussing the Os Tzadi. This light, this Or HaTzadik, comes from a place where the Merkaz and the Tzad are unified, where there is no distinction between the center and the edge, where there is no distinction between the Ikar and the Tafel, because both scream out the kavod of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Os Tzadi comes to show this unity. Rav Kook goes on and he says, "Miloi zeh v'harchava zu," This fullness and saturation that we discussed in the Os Pei, and as it continues in the Os Tsadi, and the unity and the Hachava and the combination of all different particulars in their innumerable form, Metzinim es Maleh HaTzedek HaIshi. They represent and they point towards the fullness of human righteousness on a political, sociological, psychological, and spiritual level. Our capacity to say yes to the other, our capacity to see room in ourselves for another person without feeling that they impinge on our own particular identity, without feeling that they're coming to take away that which is ours, allows us to embrace the righteousness ha'olami, this fundamental unity of everything being in its right place, of recognizing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created everything in its right place. There is nothing in existence, there is no particular form in existence, in spite of how separate it appears, that does not have its righteous place or righteous time within the grand scheme, which in the Ratzon HaKaduma, the original will Kavyachal of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in existence, as disclosed and brought to light through the Or HaTzadik, through the light of the righteous individual. Rav Kook continues, and he says, Or HaYesodi Shal Tzadik Yesod Olam, the foundational and fundamental light of the righteous individual who is the foundation of the world. The Tzaddik, Moshe Rabbeinu, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the Arizal, the Baal Shem Tov, the Vilna Gaon, every Tzaddik that comes into the world, all the different Tzaddikim, Rav Kook, Rabbi Nachman, they come to show that all particularization, all separation, all fragmentation is nothing but a further disclosure of unity, connecting that which seems disparate, showing that the side is also part of the center, showing that the tafel is also part of the ikar. Like the Mittler Rebbe said about Yosef HaTzadik, showing that the mutarot, showing that the dreams themselves, which are the mutarei haseichel, the inessential expressions of the mind, are also disclosures of truth, are also part and parcel of the gilui ha'emes, of the gilui hayichud ha'klaliyut that contains the klal naprat within it. Or hayesod yisod tzadik yisod olam, shehishavus ratzon malla yifazu, that the emergence of this profoundly beautiful will, hu binyan ha'olam klulo shechlulo v'tukumaso. The Or HaTzadik comes as emergence of particularity takes place, as the world begins to lose its unity, as the world appears to descend and fall into multiplicity and separateness and destruction, where the light of unity is no longer apparent. The Os Tsadi comes and says, no, things can be improved, things can be connected. The emergence of particularity, the emergence of separateness, the emergence of the Kayach HaGvul, which we've been talking about since the Os Aleph, the emergence of that which appears to be separate and devoid of Kedusha, is nothing but a furthering of the expression of Kedusha, showing how Yichud and Or can disclose itself in the lower regions of being, so that the Yichud of HaKadosh Baruch Hu now contains within itself separateness and unity at once. Rav Kook continues, and here he's going to touch on, like I said before, the machlokes of the Gra and his Talmidim and the Chazon Ish with regards to the writing of the Os Tsadi, whether the Yud should be facing away from the Nun or whether the Yud should be facing towards the Nun. Because again, the Yud facing away from the Nun represents Achor Ba'achor and Pirud, and the Yud, or the Zayin, as we're going to see in the words of Rav Kook, facing towards the Nun represents Yichud and Panim Lepanim, or a face-to-face relationship. Rav Kook continues, Hachayim hanukudatiyim hamisufagim meor hachayim hashotfim haklaliyim im kol melchomosehem v'netiyasa shel hamilchama v'koach hazayin el hayesod shel or hachayim u'magmaso. Now here Rav Kook is going to discuss the shape or the form of the nun. Now typically, according to most Rishonim, a tzadi is comprised of a nun and a yud on top of it, which represents the Os Tsadi. But for Rav Kook, and I haven't found the makor in the Rishonim yet, although I'm sure it exists. Typically, Rav Kook follows the psak of the Beis Yosef in terms of the Tzuras HaOsios, but here it's not according to the Beis Yosef, but I'm sure it exists, and I'll find it, Be'ezras Hashem. But the nun here is comprised of a nun and a zayin. Now, it makes sense, and this is parenthetical, the zayin and the yud, as we saw in the Os Zayin, are not separate in their form, that the Nakuda of the Yud, which contains everything within it, that infinitesimal point that contains infinitude within it, that contains all potential within it, appears like the top of the Zayin. Now, the only difference between the Zayin and the Yud is that the Zayin has a line emerging from it in the Tzura of the Vav, which represents a continuance or a drawing down of that Os Yud. So in spite of the fact that the Os Nun is typically shown as a Nun and a Yud, for Rav Kook to say that it's a Nun and a Zayin is not a stira, because the Zayin in itself is nothing but the drawing down and the emergence of the Os Yod. And if a person looks at the words of Rav Kook by the Os Zayin, this becomes even clearer in terms of the distinction Rav Kook makes between the Vav and the Zayin. Now, for Rav Kook, again, like we said, by the Os Mem we had Klaliyut HaKol, the waters, the Mayim Rabim, everything in its Klaliyut HaKol. The Os Nun was the emergence of the Nun Shari Bina, the particular identities, the fish of the sea, the emergence of individual and specific parts that come out of the Klaliyut HaKol, the Bina that comes out of Chachma. Now, the Tsadi, like we said, is the fact that all pratiyut, all distinction, all separation maintains unity within itself. The Nun of the Tsadi for Rav Kook represents that disclosure of particularity, the Nunei Hayam, the fish of the sea, the Nun Shari Bina, and the Zayin on top of the Nun, which creates the Os Tsadi, is the Zeinei HaMilchama, the weapons of war, like we saw in the Os Zayin, the threshers of the field, the Machatz de Chakla, the Bali Mekubalim, who need to fight through all distortion. Those weapons, as we saw in the Ramchal and Adir Bamaron, who discusses at length each particular weapon that the Bali Mekubalim and the Bali Sod need to use, the Zayin is there to protect the individualized identities of the Os Nun. Once something emerges from its general Klaliyut and the aura of the Chachma, represented by the Os Mem, it descends into the particularity of the Os Nun, which again, as we said by the Os Nun, is Nun Shari Bina. And Bina, although it's unified in its collectiveness, still maintains a certain relationship with Gevura and Din. Because by Bina, the Zohar says that Din and Mis'arnimene, that Din and judgment emerge from within the womb of Bina. So we see that as we discuss the particularization of being, as the fish emerge within the sea, from the Mem to the Nun, there's a need to protect. There's a need to ensure that each particular identity maintains its own individualized existence, which is the avoda of the tzaddik, to show that they're all part of the same thing. And therefore, Rav Kook says that the Os Tsadi is a Nun and a Zayin together. Particularity as expressed in the Nun, and the protection of particularity and the insurance of its continuation as an individualized and separate entity through the Os Zayin. And as part of the discussion, Rav Kook is going to say that the Zayin bends itself into the Nun, towards the Chek, towards the lap of the Nun, showing us that it is not an Achor b'Achor relationship like we saw by the Kas HaRishaim, by the Shabtai Tzvi and his Talmidim Chas v'Shalom, where there's a distortion and Tohu reigns supreme, where the Yud or the Zayin is facing away from the Nun. But for Rav Kook, the Zayin and the Yud are facing towards the Nun, representing the fact that all particularization, all Tohu, is simply for the fact of showing how Yichud can be that much deeper. And Rav Kook says as follows: Nitiyaso shel milchama, the movement of the war of a koach hazayin and the strength of the weapon, they move towards el hayesod shel or hachayim umagmaso. They are always directed towards the emergence of the light of life and its purpose. Lo el hamisa v'hachorban shehu she'ifas harasha, not towards death and destruction, which is the desire of the Rasha, representing the fact that the Zayin and the Nun would be facing apart from one another, as discussed by the Vilna Gaon and shown to be part and parcel of the Sabbatean expression of the Kabbalah of the Arizal, Chas v'Shalom, but rather it's facing towards Tova, it's facing towards Kedusha and Chayim, that the Zayin is bending towards the Nun, showing that all that appears separate and apart is really formed to bring about a deeper yichud. Lo el hamisa v'achorban shehu she'ifas harasha, not towards death and destruction, which is the desire of the wicked. Yigala lanu hatzadi b'tmunaso. The tzadi shows us in its shape, tmunas hanun, the picture of the Nun, Sefigat HaChayim, Samel HaAfriya v'Hitgalut HaChiyunit mitoch HaShefes HaMalei shel Hitmazgus Kol HaPratim El HaKlaliyut HaEsana Mikolos Mayim Rabim Adirim Mishvei Barayam Adir Bamarom Hashem. Here Rav Kook is showing us that the Os Mem is fundamental to every letter that comes after the os mem. That by the os mem, we have to remember that that was a kaliyut hakol, and the nun represents the emergence of particularity. And this nun represented within the tzadi, along with the zayin, which protects the individualized expression, nimshahu el hanun, mitakim hu el ba'al cheko. The zayin, which stands at the top of the nun, is bending towards it, bending towards the light of Kedusha, bending towards the perfection and the further expression of unity in the world, not separate, chas v'shalom, not representative of rishus or destruction. Habasis ha'ma'asi, and now Rav Kook is going to finish off with the bottom of the tzadi. The functional and expressive foundation, because again, we're emerging into the realm of separateness and the world of Asiya, hamitgalim bepoel u'biyitzira shel hatzedek, that are disclosed in actuality through the act of righteousness, through the avoda of ensuring that the prat and the klal are unified, that separateness and unity are unified, v'hatzdaka v'hatzadik, and charity and righteousness. I wish I had more time to go into these particular points that Rav Kook is making, but I want to ensure that the shir doesn't go too long. B'chol tzadei tzadav, in all of the different sides, in all of that which appears inessential, of all that which appears to be separate from the center, everything is contained within the os tzadi, showing how everything serves the purpose. B'chol yichushav v'ksharav, in all of their relationships and connections. It goes and it emerges. The bottom part of the tzadi emerges and it elongates itself. It enlarges and elongates itself to ensure that the pratiyut as expressed in the tzadik, the pratiyut as expressed in the os tzadi, the tzadiyut, the secondariness, the sidedness, the tzayid befiv, that Yitzchak Avinu was able to see by Esav, because the avodah of the tzaddik is to try and collect all separateness, everything that is separate, even if it appears in the piv of the Rasha. The kitzayid befiv, the kitzadi befiv, which Chazal tell us was the neshama of Rabbi Akiva and the neshama of Rabbi Meir, which are the avodah and the avos of Torah Shebal Peh, which is the allowance that we have to see pratiyut engaging with kaliyut. Torah Shebal Peh in relationship to Torah Shebechsav is disparity and separateness in relationship to unity. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Meir, the tzayid befiv, the tzadi in the mouth of Esav HaRasha, that represents the ability of the tzaddik to elevate the pratiyut back to the klal, to show how everything is part and parcel of Kedusha. It is mit'arechu ha'mamed hatachtiti, v'tchunatav mitgaledet. And the avodah of the tzaddik grows. The tzaddik grows to make more room for further pratiyut. Chazaku habinyan hashomer et kol ha'omdim alav me'yerida tahomit. Like we said in the beginning, the tzadi is a dangerous letter because if it's misunderstood, it can descend into the abyss. And therefore, Rav Kook says the bottom of the tzadi needs to elongate itself to ensure that it doesn't allow separateness to fall away from unity. Yiras Hashem hu makor chayim. The fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the source of life. Leman sur mishol mata, in order to ensure that we do not descend into the abyss of below. Umigdal oz shem Hashem, and the tower of courage as representative of the tzaddik and the tzadi, and the connection between Shemayim and Aretz and Klal Uprat, is the strength of the name of the Hashem. Bo yarutz tzaddik v'nishkav. There the tzaddik will run and it will be victorious. We're going to see next week, Os Kuf is one of my favorite letters in the Sefer Reish Millin. Os Kuf is now, once emergence of particularization takes place, there is a duplication in the world. There is that which appears to be the Masa Kof, something that is mimicry, the act of the ape, which imitates the human being. And Rav Kook is going to show the two levels of mimicry, of holiness and of unholiness. And in Mir Hashem, we're going to see how through the pei we come to the tzadi, which protects the emergence of particularity, and then we come to the kuf, which allows us to have actual kedusha.